here's what I want to talk about. I basically want to talk about transparency in our industry, how that's helpful and how that's not, how it holds us to almost this like perfection kind of standard. I want to talk through that a little bit. I want to talk about kind of like two different frames of it. Like one, if you're kind of thinking like, I want more transparent content that will make me feel better. Or if you're thinking, I want to share more transparently in my business, but I don't know how to do that in a way that feels good, we're going to kind of cover all that, run the gamut. Sound good? Okay. If you're here, say hi. Tell me if that sounds good to you. I would love to know where you kind of sit with all this right now. If you feel good about sharing that, like, are you wanting to see more transparency? Do you feel like pressure to do that? Like, what's your kind of relationship to this right now if you're here and if you're listening? Hi, Ronak. Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate it. I know I say this, but I just always want you guys to know how much I appreciate you. Whether you're coming live or watching the replay, it really means so much to me. I know that there are 5 million other ways that you could be spending your time. And so the fact that you choose to spend it with me and watching this really means the world to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Hi, Harshad. Oh, I'm excited for you to be here for this too. I'm very excited to see what you think. Okay, so I want to kind of start out by saying I love transparency, right? I feel like I have dedicated a lot of my business to that. I have, 3 client lessons a week, 2 podcasts around that, especially literally being dedicated to that. Client files, more. I mean, there's like a million things, right? Like I think every week I'm on here trying to say more and more about that, share about that. But here's the caveat. I think I'm probably gonna surprise you with where we're going with this. I actually feel like this conversation around transparency in our industry has maybe swung the other way to being really unhelpful, where I think there are some great things about it. And again, obviously, personally invested in it in my business. And I really feel like we've kind of gone the other way in our space where now there's so much like pressure and expectation around it. And I want to talk about that too, because I feel like, in most cases, too much of anything isn't a good thing. And I think that that's kind of where we're getting with transparency in our space too, where there's now like becoming a lot of pressure and responsibility on that, but also responsibility, not just in the sense of the business owner, but responsibility in the sense of almost feeling like I would feel better about my business if other people were being more transparent. I would feel better about my income if other people were telling me more transparently what theirs looked like, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where it gets unhelpful too, because then we're still kind of outsourcing that ability to feel good in our business by thinking if someone else was more transparent, I would know X. If someone else was more transparent, I would feel better about Y. So I want to talk about that too, because I think that's where it gets a little dicey too, because what I really believe and what I've learned and what I want to share today over doing all of this kind of work that I'm doing in terms of like literally and all of that is you will still never, ever know what goes on, no matter how transparent someone is being, right? So, something I think about a lot is that I think literally is maybe like 22 hours of content. I'd have to think about that, but like rough estimate, 18 sessions plus solo episodes, whatever. Let's say literally it's 22 hours of content. You are still barely scratching the fucking surface in terms of what actually goes on behind the scenes in that person's life experience, day to day, et cetera. Right? Even like when I think about, actually, this is a good example. So I recently shared on a live stream about how a lit up life was on track for $1 million a year. We were celebrating like 107K a month or something like that. And I was talking a lot about that in a live stream. And I actually specifically, I used to share revenue, and I would share expenses and profit, usually at least once a year. And I don't really do that anymore. And the reason I don't do that anymore is because I actually feel like that's not super fucking helpful to anyone. So, what I mean by that is my business model is totally different than almost anybody in this space, right? And because of my business model being really different and having a different trajectory, my profit margins also look really different. So, we have profit margins that I'm really, really proud of and feel good about, but they also look different because of our business model. But it also took a lot of time to grow our business model to get to the point where we're bringing in the income. So there's just trade-offs. But I feel like if I'm sharing, here's what I'm spending on, here's what my margins are, et cetera, and you're comparing it to you who has a totally different business model, totally different setup, et cetera, it actually becomes less helpful in some ways for me to be transparent, because now what we're doing is we're holding ourselves to this other crazy expectation that doesn't even fit. Does that make sense? So it's like, sure, it can be helpful to see what someone else is doing, but also sometimes then it sets up this expectation that literally doesn't fit us. And now we just feel more and more like shit. Does that make sense? If you're listening, tell me if you're tracking, because I feel like I'm kind of bouncing all over, but we're going to get to some good stuff here. But that's why I've actually pulled back on being as transparent about that, because I feel like that it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And you would miss out on so much context of how long it's taken us to get to this point, what it's taken for us to grow this, everything that goes into the business model that we have, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the deal. Even if I shared all of that, all of it, right? The other things we're still not taking into account are things like, the amount of privilege I have, how fast I work, how often I work, what other responsibilities I have in my life, how supportive my family is, how supportive my partner is, my mental health, my physical health, my support team, how much sleep I require, how much sleep I actually get, how much, therapy I've had. Like, I mean, I could go literally on and on and on, right? But do you see how that's so interesting, how it feels like, oh, if people would only be more transparent about their numbers, then it would, make this industry X. I still don't think that's true, right? Or if people would be more transparent about like what it looks like to build their business. Yes, cool. I love that. And literally, I think it's one of the coolest things I've done in my business. And you probably don't know half that shit I just listed about any of the people that have been on from season to season, right? Like, isn't that wild to think about? And it's so fucking important to think about, because that's where it gets messy in our space, I think, is we're saying transparency, but we're not even taking a million other things into account. And so then we're often left actually feeling worse and not better, Harjat says it totally makes sense, especially if we're all trying to build a business that works uniquely for us. Exactly. Hi, Michelle. It's been another crazy day, but wanted to pop in and say hi. Looking forward to catching the replay. Michelle, if you have something you want to share with us so we can celebrate you, feel free to do that too, but totally okay if you can't stay, but also very happy to celebrate you. And if anybody else has anything they want to celebrate, feel free to share that with us too. Feels like a celebration day. Right. So that is so important. Again, like, we're having 22 plus hours of content on literally, and you probably don't know all of that, right? Like, all of the support system, the mental health, the physical health, the well-being, the amount of time they have to work, how fast they're working, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Michelle said, I'll share soon. Okay, perfect. Beautiful. So excited for you. So I really want to talk about this and paint this picture more and be more clear on this, because I feel like there's this way in which we feel like if people in our space were just more transparent, then things would feel better. And I think what we have to remember is that all transparency is still typically marketing if it's coming from a business, right? So even though literally is very transparent, it's still marketing, right? The point is still to market my coaching services in many ways, or the point of a guest being on it is still to have exposure and marketing for their business too. Now, Do I feel like I'm being 100% authentic on literally? Absolutely. Do I feel like the people who are coming on there are being 100% authentic on literally? Absolutely. Right. But it's still through the lens of marketing. And so we have to remember that too. Like, even when someone's sharing revenue numbers and expense and profit numbers, they're typically doing it for marketing purposes, right? And so again, like, I want to just talk about all this because I think what I want to share the most is that we have to have really good lenses on these things and practice a tremendous amount of discernment when we're looking at what transparency means in our space. Okay? Because I feel like if we think transparency solves the problem, so to speak, of like us feeling a certain way in our business, or of us knowing it's okay if we're building our business a certain way, or knowing if it's okay that our profit margin's a certain way, we're still missing the point, right? We're still like, if you listen to literally and you use that as a comparison to how well or not well you're doing, even that will still be a hindrance, not a helper. If you listen to literally and take the context of everyone has their own journey and that's my takeaway, that's when it's going to really support you. Just like if you read the like transparent posts from other people and the takeaway is everyone is on their own journey, you're on a roll, right? If the takeaway is, oh, it should look like this for me, or I should have grown this fast, or it should have popped by this time, none of it helps. It's just as detrimental as someone painting the perfect picture in many ways. Does that make sense? So I feel like that's really, really important to say in terms of what are we making transparency mean in our space, and then how are we using discernment for that? I think that, again, it's still marketing and we have to remember that, like it's still, someone sharing their income, again, it's probably because they feel really good about that and are really proud of that. Or if they're sharing, oh my God, why is this always hard for me to think of? Expenses. There we go. It's probably because they feel really good about where those are at. Do you see what I mean? And then there's a whole other conversation past that, which is, and just because someone has good profit margins, it doesn't mean they're even going to be good at helping you build a great business. Do you see what I mean? So that whole conversation of like, we should transparently be sharing expenses and da 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 and revenue and profit and whatever. There's nothing wrong with it, but the pressure to do it as a metric for who would be good at helping you or not gets really tough. It also gets tough because then what happens, I think, and this is why I was saying kind of like if you feel like you can never do it right in the email I sent about this, is not only do we feel the pressure to be transparent, but then, wait for it, we feel like it has to look a certain way, what we're transparently sharing. Does that make sense? So then it keeps people from even wanting to start the business or show up or whatever, because we're feeling like it's not good enough. Like it doesn't look perfect, so I can't be transparent about it. Like it's so fucked, right? Like, so you never want to start. Like when I started my business, I wasn't making shit. Do you know what I mean? My margins were terrible. I hired a one-on-one coach. When I first started and wasn't making any money, I was like in the hole for a while. You know what I mean? So if that had been the metric that I had to share, I would have never been able to start. I would have been paralyzed. I would have been frozen. I would have felt trapped because it would have felt like, well, I have to share what I'm making in order to get clients, but I can't get clients unless I can share what I'm making in this like really amazing way. Like you're stuck, you're backed into a corner, right? Hey, Shari, thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Patricia says, yes, it just keeps you stuck when you are looking at others and trying to see all the details. Exactly. Spot on. Shari says, don't even know what today is about, but wanted a little break in community time and remembered your live was happening. So good. I actually think you'll totally love this topic anyway, Shari. So meant to be to have you here and to get your thoughts on it too. But does that make sense? So like that's where transparency can start to become really unhelpful in our space, is because it's still marketing. And so now we're trying to market transparently and make it look good, or we feel like if it doesn't look good, we can't, you know? When really, again, that can't be the thing. What has to be the thing, and this is a whole other conversation that we'll have for a second, is can you help me? Like, can you truly help me? And we have to stop, in my opinion, judging can you help me based solely on the results someone has gotten for themselves. Now, do I think that marketing works? Honestly, I think it works really fucking great. you know, I think when across the board, when I see clients share their results and what they've gotten, I think that is hands down what is making people buy in our space right now. But I don't know that that's always helpful, because I think, again, that pushes the line so far. Now, I'm not saying that you wouldn't want a mentor that was ahead of you, or, doing things that you want to be doing, or up to things you want to be up to, whatever. But again, if you feel like one thing means the other, you're totally missing the point. Does that make sense? So like, if because I like what your revenue and profit look like, I make the direct correlation that you can help me, or if because I like exactly what your life looks like, I make the direct correlation that you can help me. And again, we're not taking the 5,000 other factors into account that I just said regarding, like, I won't even go through them again, right? But I listed out like 15 things. So that's important too. Again, it doesn't mean you can't hire someone because you like think they're amazing and so resonate with the type of life they're living and the values they have and all of that. But if we're making one thing mean the other, that's when it gets tricky. And again, that's when transparency marketing can get confusing, right? Michelle said, okay, I had a moment and came back because this feels like the perfect combo to share my big news in. I officially put in my 3 weeks notice. It still counts. Full-time entrepreneurship, here I come. And I also super messy, not at all what I expected it to look like or be. And we honestly can't afford for us to do it. But my inner knowing said it was time, and I always knew I would when it was time. So leaning into that self-trust and trusting this is all part of it working. I've also got a post about this coming soon. So good, Michelle. Congratulations. And yes, so important to be able to share the both and there too. Again, right? Like, it's not like transparency marketing is bad, but Michelle also doesn't have to now tell us every step of why she made that decision, what her finances look like, and all of this kind of stuff either, right? So you see there's like such a line there, but so freaking excited for you, Michelle. Congrats. Sherry said, I like this combo. Love that you're speaking. Oh, shoot. Shari, can you repost that? Is that possible? I know that's a giant pain, but it disappeared. Everyone's saying congrats. So it went away. Yes, she's been feeling like this was in the works for you. Ah, so exciting. So good. Yes. So do you see the I guess dichotomy here, where it's like, I love how Michelle just shared that. I feel like that's how I personally believe in sharing a lot of things in my business. Here's the both. And okay, let me read Shari's immediately. Love that you're speaking to this. I find that the more someone can own the narrative and share intentionally why their results may be different than what they've helped with, this builds a lot of trust and allows you to be an expert and look different. Exactly. Right. And the more you can share, like, here's what's going on for me, but it doesn't mean that's what it will look like for you, which is exactly what Michelle's saying. Like, hey, I left. It was messy. It was weird circumstances. I'm following my gut. Here's what it looks like for me, right? Is where it's so magic. When it feels like pressure to share, when it feels like I need to share so my audience feels a certain way versus I want to share because it feels good for me, that's when it gets tricky, right? Or when it feels like I'm putting pressure on people, like that person should share because or that person should share so everyone doesn't feel like shit about themselves. That's not it either, right? Like, that is so not it either. That's like outsourcing our power in many ways versus remembering that we will literally never, ever have true transparency. Like, that's the conversation that I think is important. And personally, I want to have that even more. Like, even on literally, you will never have total transparency. Actually, funny little thing. This season coming up, season 5, I guess it will be, of literally, we've started recording, and the coachee got on a call with me a couple weeks ago, was definitely upset about something that was just super fucking personal. And we decided not to record it. And so you're going to get something different that episode from me. And the point of that is we're trying to be transparent about their business journey as much as possible. But even that, you don't know what's personally going on with someone, what they're dealing with, all of those things. And the coachee doesn't owe it to anyone to have to share that either, right? And so that's where it's really important to remember we will never have full transparency into someone else's true circumstances, no matter what, right? And so doing all of our buying and showing up through that lens with that discernment is the best gift we can give ourselves, instead of thinking, I would feel better if X, I would feel better if people were more transparent about Y. It has to be, I know I will never see full transparency. Does that make sense? Michelle says, yes, knew this is coming, never expected to go down like this, but here we are, moving past the anger and grief part and into the celebration and joy. And what a great group to get to do that with. Michelle, I love it. And just so you know, I feel like that is so normal. Like mine looked exactly 0, like I thought it would, and not great at all. So doesn't mean anything, right? It's like what I always say, process doesn't mean anything about the outcome. So I think you are spot on. Love that y'all did that and honored what they needed. And of course you did. Yes. Oh, thank you. Harjat says, so loving this conversation, because often at times there may be a feeling of you being inauthentic because you're not sharing the whole story, not because you're trying purposely to be shady, but because the whole thing doesn't make sense for who you are and need to be for so many reasons. Exactly. Diane says, we'll never have full transparency. I love that. Exactly. Right. And I feel like there's this huge weight that gets lifted when we remember that. Like if you look at all marketing, all social through the lens of, I will never have full transparency, everything gets easier, right? Like everything, because we stop thinking we have it or we need it, right? I stop thinking, oh, this person is so transparent about their whole life and I don't have that. No, the fuck they are. Nobody is. Or I would feel better if everyone was so transparent and they're not. No, the fuck you wouldn't. It would bring up a whole host of other issues where you still feel not good enough in whatever way, shape, or form, because that's the same thing it can do, right? So yeah, just remembering that I think is so important and really lifts so much intensity around it. And I think what it helps you do is actually make better buying decisions, right? So you're actually buying from the lens of, do I really feel like this person is the right fit for me, the right values for me, whatever, instead of like, I'm only buying from someone that I feel like has the exact things I want. It's like, I want to buy from someone that helps me get what I want. And those are different things, right? Shari started her business after getting unexpectedly hired. Oh, she means fired, unexpectedly fired. So I totally hear this and holding space for the grief that can come with change that feels hard, and also for the magic going on behind the scenes for you. So beautiful. Just so good. And it's like so cool that you can share that now, right, Shari? Like where at the time it probably felt like nothing was working out, and now you're like best thing ever. So I think that's so important. For not getting a job. No. Oh, Diane, that's like the nicest compliment in the whole entire world. There's so much oxygen in this conversation. I've never heard that. That is like, oh, see, that makes me emotional. Michelle's quit. You said that. Oh, it's just so good. I'll pull it together. But yes, it's so true that it doesn't always look good at the time, but it usually is. But you're already seeing the good, so that's magic. Yeah, so I think sometimes we put too much responsibility on the content to be transparent. We need to put more responsibility on how we're processing the content, which is huge, right? I think that we have to process from a lens of, I will never have full transparency, and that gets easier. I love it when we do It's not super hard to do. I remember when I started my business, I hit 6 figures and then went to 0. Yes, Patricia, thank you. And then had to rebuild. Yeah. And what's so interesting about that, right, is like, that's where in my opinion, the transparency thing gets so screwed, because it's like, then what, do you have to share that in the moment, or you're not being authentic or transparent? Kind of like Harjat was saying before. No, like, you have to take care of yourself. You have to personally process that. And quite honestly, it doesn't even mean that you aren't great at what you do. Like, this is what happens with some of my clients sometimes, is they feel like, because there's so much pressure for like authenticity and transparency, they feel like if they're having a bump in the road in their business, then it means like they're not being authentic, or they can't help people or something like that. And it's like, no, like, because you have a bump in your business, that's what makes you qualified to help people. Like, because you had to have it fall apart and rebuild, that's what makes you so qualified. But we don't have to share it in the time. At the time, we have to be able to take care of ourselves, right? And to be going through something so intense like what you had happen, Patricia, and to also feel a responsibility to share that on social media, in my opinion, is super fucking toxic, right? This is like a slightly different example, but like for me, I didn't share that I was getting divorced until not only had I like asked for it, gone through it, it was final, got the paperwork, et cetera, because it was a really hard time for me. And so to have to personally process that and then feel compelled to like authentically share it, like we're just setting up a toxic environment, I think. And then to feel like I'm not being truthful with my audience if I'm not, so fucked, right? Yes, I said it so well. Okay, good. Michelle says yes to taking care of ourselves. That's a big piece of why I felt called to quit. Fuck yes. Yes. And you know what's so beautiful? I noticed, Michelle, like when I left my job, like it was over this huge ethical disagreement. And so integrity has been such a foundational piece of my business now. And I'm so fucking grateful for that. Like that was such a catalyst that now integrity feels like the foundation on which I built. And I feel like what you're saying is such a catalyst for you, was like honoring yourself and taking care of yourself. So how cool for that to be the foundation upon which you build now. Like, oh, makes me so excited for you. Diane says absolutely. Yeah. So that's where I think it gets weird. And this is where I want to talk about how to be transparent as a business owner in the way that feels good. You really have to decide what that line is for you. If you are sharing because it feels great to share, amazing. If you're sharing because you feel like if you don't, you're an imposter, or you're supposed to be transparent, or you owe your audience something or whatever, that is the stop sign every time that you're in a weird dynamic and relationship with your audience and you need to fucking take care of yourself, right? So I feel really great about transparently sharing on Literally because I feel really great about that way of sharing. Like, does that make sense? Like, I didn't start Literally because I said, I want to be as transparent as humanly possible. I started Literally because I said, I want a different kind of podcast because I'm not like as great at teaching. Like, I want to coach. And so that's where that came from. And then the transparency piece was such an important, beautiful underlying piece of it. But it's because it felt really great to share in that way. Does that make sense? Yeah, Michelle says, amen. It's Deepa says it's so funny because none of those rules apply to a brick and mortar business. Like, nothing of my life is available to even my best clients. A freaking men. Amen, right? It's so true. Like, I think we've created this like a somewhat toxic kind of environment in the online space where it feels like everything is open to public consumption. And if it's not, it's a problem. And it's just like, we have to, like, one of the things I live by a lot in my business, which sounds fucked, but I'll explain it, is I don't know anyone's shit. Right? Like, I don't owe anyone anything. Authenticity, transparency, none of that. I get to decide how I want to do that and what feels good to me, but I don't owe anyone shit. And that's what makes it feel good to show up. The second you start feeling like, I owe transparency or whatever is when it gets toxic and isn't actually transparent. It's feeling like, you know, you're on the hook for something, so to speak, or feeling like you have to prove why someone should hire you, right? Yeah, totally, Shari. Having a personal brand or service-based business really changes the way we market. I completely agree. Completely agree. And some of it's not bad, right? Like there's not all bad in that. Like in some ways, I love getting to see like someone the day in someone's life or hear about what's going on in their life. Like, you know, the flip side to that is when I was a therapist, like you don't get to share any of that shit, right? There's like, you know, you're a blank slate, basically. You're like, there's none of that. And so like parts of it are amazing and good and yummy and beautiful and connective and all of that. But then we have to toe that line of like, where does it feel like that versus where does it start to feel like I have to, I'm supposed to, I have to prove it. I need it for my marketing. That's when it gets wrong, or, you know, in my opinion, wrong. Michelle says, I don't know anyone shit. Another amen. And something I tell my community all the time when they're falling into the shoulds of giving. Yes, 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 yes. So, so relevant for your people too, for all of us, right? So as a business owner, I really feel like we have to create discernment. So for me, like one of the lines I have around transparency is like, I share when it feels relevant and really helpful to my audience, and when it feels good to me. If it doesn't feel relevant and helpful and doesn't feel good to me, it feels like a no for me. That's pretty much it. If it feels like I'm supposed to, or I should, or whatever, I really try to check that. One really good example that I have for this is, I feel like maybe I should say I know, but I know that my Instagram engagement would blow up if I shared more day-to-day life in my stories or more personal stuff or whatever. Like even when I share my little personal, like sometimes weekend recaps or whatever, like those get the most engagement by far, which is cool. I love sharing those when it feels good. But yeah, 100% I would have a different level of engagement and all of that if I was sharing way more of the like day-to-day life, behind the scenes, etc. And it just doesn't feel good to me right now. Again, that might change down the road, but right now I feel like I show up really fully in my business. I show up fully for the content I put out. I'm putting out 3 client lessons a week. We put out client files, 2 podcasts, this live stream, etc. Like I'm good. I'm capped, you know? And so it doesn't feel great for me to share that other stuff. Again, that might change in the future. Like, who knows? I'm available for that to be different. But for right now, it would feel like I was doing it because I was supposed to be more transparent or more relatable or whatever the fuck, and not because I wanted to. And so that's where I draw the line, even if it means less engagement potentially. What I want is to feel good in the ways I'm being transparent. And I feel like there are plenty of ways that I'm already doing that feel great to me. I don't have to add another just because I should, right? Diane says, I don't owe anyone shit. That's so genius. Totally relate. As a former yoga teacher, now coach, I need to leave my stuff at the door. Yes, totally. Melanie Ann Laird talks about filtering this through the lens of for me, for you, for us. And I really like this framework. Oh yeah, so good. Totally, right? Feels good to me, helps the audience, then it's for us. I think that's probably what you mean, Michelle, right? I love that. That's so good. I love the way you share your heart. And I also love seeing a pic of you and Kenny here for all of it. So funny. Yeah, totally. Oh, if you feel comfortable, can you share what doesn't feel good and how this impacts you? Yeah, totally, Shari. It's really just like a time commitment kind of thing, if that makes sense. So like, I feel like when I show up in my business, I am fully in and fully on and fully present. And so to feel like I need to do it outside of that, like when I'm like out or on the weekend or whatever, it just doesn't feel good to me right now. Or like, even when I'm like doing other stuff, like when I have downtime or whatever, like you guys know my business model is a one-on-one. So like I'm on, you know, like I'm on calls, I'm on this live, I'm on a podcast, like, so to then be on stories a lot just doesn't feel appealing to me right now. It's not necessarily anything around like the specifics of my personal life, but I also do think that sometimes there can be then almost pressure for that to feel exciting or whatever. And like, I don't want that pressure either. Like, I don't want to feel like any of that weight either, again, because I feel like I already hold and carry a lot in my business in terms of the amount of support I give, the amount of energy and effort, the amount of holding of like all the clients and stuff. So feeling that in any other way is just not something that I personally am interested in right now. Like, some way I could see that changing is if like, you know, I potentially had less on time or less clients in the future, or wanted to do more thought leadership than coaching or whatever. I could see how I might shift that and feel different. But right now it just would feel almost like another thing I'm doing to do, if that makes sense. Yep, I hear you on this. I connect with this a lot, but have felt a shift in the past 3 months for myself in terms of feeling good to show more the behind the scenes. So I appreciate it. Yeah, totally. I've had like times where I've done it more or less, and I think it just varies. So yeah, and like, again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just the not feeling like there's this element, like where now you're saying, I felt a shift and it feels really good. Amazing. Like, you know, and I think probably I'll go back and forth on that too. Like, even I'm sure you guys, if you follow me on Instagram, have noticed like I have been sharing more like personal photos and stuff like that. That has felt really fun and good lately. And it's like made me remember to take more personal pictures even, which I've loved that. So it feels like it's giving back to me in a way. So like, I'm all about that, and that's feeling awesome right now. So who knows, like, we'll see how that evolves, you know? Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for joining us. Okay, cool. What else do I want to say here? I have little notes here. Oh, I would say a couple last things. So as a business owner, number one, filter all content through the lens of, I will never have full transparency with anyone. Oh, Sherry says, yes, the on thing for me too. When I'm really off, I usually don't have my phone with me. Exactly. But it does seem to correlate with how much call versus non-call periods there are. Fascinating. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that is really true for me. Yeah, it just doesn't feel like, yeah, I feel like there, like, I'm almost like, the way I think about it is almost like I'm having a ton of connection throughout the day, and that really fills my tank and feels good to me. If I was having less connection throughout the day, I'd probably want more connection through stories and things like that. So yeah, I think it totally fluctuates based on calls too. Love the focus on feeling good. So good. All right. So remember, there's never full transparency. Again, even literally, even me and wanting to share as much as I possibly can, there will never ever be that. Like, you guys have no idea how much support I have, how well I sleep, how well my physical and mental health is, blah, 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 right? And also, full transparency on a business model that's not yours isn't always helpful either. I think it can be interesting, but I think we have to have a really good lens of not making that mean it should look like something for us, right? And as someone putting out the content too, not just consuming it, I think we have to really figure out what that line is for us and check in with ourselves every time. Am I sharing this because I feel like I'm supposed to, or am I sharing this because it feels good? Because I know it serves me, because I know it serves my audience, right? And feeling like I have to share it for someone else is where it gets toxic, right? And paying attention to that is so freaking important. When it feels empowering, when it feels good, share away, be as transparent as you could be, like, right? Do it align to your values? Like, again, literally super aligned to my values of the both and, the journey, the process, the what, like, all of that stuff that is so juicy to me and that I love talking about, like, literally is so aligned to that. And so the transparency part of it feels amazing. And we still have lines, we still have boundaries. Like I was saying, that, you know, we didn't have that coaching call or recorded, or, you know, all the people that I've been on literally have Basecamp access to talk about things that they maybe wouldn't feel as good being transparent about. And having that space is so important, to be able to say, yes, this feels good. Here's my line. Yes, this feels amazing. I don't owe anyone shit. so freaking important. And it's what makes business actually continue to feel good over time. And personally, I think it's what makes it feel like, this is so interesting. So I read this book recently. I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second. Stick with me. I promise it'll come back around and then I will stop. But I read this book recently. So good, by the way. Someone that is in the online space, Leah Gervais recommended it to me. Like, she didn't even recommend it, which was so interesting. She was more just like telling me how she read it, and it really meant a lot to her. And the book is called Quit Like a Woman, and it's about not drinking alcohol. And we were talking about how I think AA is great. And she was like, oh, this book has an interesting take on it, blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to read it. Just through the lens of like having been really interested in that subject for a long time, but it impacted me a lot. And I thought the book was fantastic. And long story short, one of the things she talks about in the book, if you haven't read it, even if you don't feel like alcohol is a problem for you or whatever, it truly is an interesting book from like a feminist perspective. I really enjoyed it. But one of the things she talks about is choosing between guilt and resentment. And she talks about if you have to pick between guilt and resentment, pick guilt every fucking time. And I thought that was the most genius way I've ever heard that explained. And I think the same is true with content. So what she means by that is like, I'll use content as the example, is if you have to feel guilty that you aren't sharing something with your audience, like, I had some guilt when I was going through the divorce and not sharing that. I'll pick that guilt every fucking time versus sharing it and then feeling resentful as shit that I shared something that I wasn't ready to share, that I wasn't ready to get commentary on, that I feel really icky and vulnerable, not in the good way, for sharing. And she was talking about that again as it relates to alcohol and something totally different. But I was like, that is the best lens. And I have shared that with so many clients on different topics recently, because that guilt versus resentment, damn, that's good. So anyway, think about that as it relates to your content, like so helpful, right? Yeah, Michelle says, then the line can always move. Exactly. And that's the best part. That's 100% true. How cool. I've never read this book, but I say this all the time, pick guilt over resentment. Oh, that's so funny, Harsha. I'm obsessed with that. Like that lens. So smart. Yeah, Diane, exactly. Like that, just like, how you like have those moments where you read something and your brain's just like it's how I would think about things, but I never put that context on it. And anyway, so good. Highly recommend. But yeah, I think that's how we have to look at transparency. Like, am I going to feel guilty for personally processing something, or am I going to feel resentful for sharing it? And if you're going to have to pick between one of the two, pick guilt every time. Do not put yourself in that place where it feels toxic to have to put something out there. And again, if you're new and you're feeling the pressure around transparency, don't do that either. Like, that's where all the perfection comes in. Not only do we feel like we have to be transparent, but it's got to look fucking good. You know what I mean? Like, that's where it gets so crazy too. So again, don't let this whole version of transparency also make you feel like it's supposed to be perfect. It is not. That's not it at all. And I think we have to recognize that for what it is in our space too. Started cooking dinner so I could keep listening it. Michelle, you're the best. We're so excited for you. Also, don't feel like you have to answer right now because I know you're cooking, but you also have to tell us how you're celebrating, because that is such a big fucking deal. Okay, so I think that's really all I had to say on this, but I mostly just really felt like I wanted to like get this out. Like, I think that this is just so valuable. And you guys know that I'm always talking about the both and. And I think this is it. Transparency, such a both and thing. I think it is so helpful to see someone else's journey, to know we all have ups and downs, all of those kind of things. And I think it can get really toxic in our space, and we just have to find that line for us. So it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it's both, as is everything. So I hope that helps. I hope that just gives you a little bit of permission to remember what you're reading, no matter how transparent, what you're listening to, you're still missing a ton. I hope it gives you permission to figure out the best way to be transparent for you and what that looks like. And I hope that it is supportive of you. So thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Again, I said this at the beginning, but seriously means the world to me. I know you could spend your time in a million other ways, and spending it here has just meant the world to me. So appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Congrats, Michelle. Um, welcome to planet Earth. Shari says, home of duality. It's so true. Harshad says, love this live stream. Thank you for always bringing such valuable conversations. You're so welcome. Thank you for being here. Michelle got brunch and drinks. Apparently in my brain, that's drunks, with a friend who quit her 9 to 5, and that felt like the transition to joy starting, but I'm still working on finding that celebration 5, still in the boom phase a little bit. Yes, that makes sense. Maybe you give yourself a week, like process, then celebrate. Diane, thank you, Diane. Amazing. All right, I hope you guys have a beautiful week. So appreciate you all, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and just for fun, since I mentioned it, on August 16th, I believe, time TBD, the new coachee of Literally is going to join us. So I think it'll be like a couple weeks from now, but that'll be super fun too. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week, and I hope you all have an amazing week. All right, bye y'all.